Thank you. Thank you, brother.
I've got to remind you that when you say something.
And I appreciate that. I do. I do. I do appreciate that so very, very much. All right. This is April the 26th. And hey, brother, glad to see you. And glad you finally got it. Good to see you. Good to see you. You hear me okay? Can you hear me okay, Jim?
Hey, Tommy.
Hey, brother. I was wondering if you was going to show up tonight, but anyway.
I just got through eating dinner, so I could sit down. I'm ready to go.
Okay, good deal. Somebody else just got finished eating dinner, so we're going to be all right tonight, man. Everybody's going to be fat and happy. There you go.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. All right. Last week, we spent some time talking about the Passover, and I tried to spend a little bit of time talking about how the Passover is celebrated today. I hope again that some of you had the opportunity to maybe look at some other YouTube videos. There are some other things out there, and I wish again if we had the time. Hopefully, whenever we do things, we'll look at Exodus and maybe as a 3-hour class instead of just a 1-hour class. But I hope that you realize just how closely 1 Corinthians chapter 5, where it says Christ is our Passover, and how all this stuff really fits together and how it's symbolic of all of that. Think about the idea, again, some things that we need to think about with regards to Jesus and so forth. Number one, in Exodus 12 at verse 6, he emphasizes the idea, you shall keep it, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it, the Passover at twilight. About the idea as well that we have killed Christ, right? Is it not the case because of our sins that we have
Tommy, you're muted.
now, how's that?
There you go.
Okay. All right. So what happened as a result of that, not only was Christ killed, the Passover lamb was killed at sunset, but Christ was killed at sunset. And again, between the two evenings. So between the two evenings would have been probably between 3 and 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's exactly what, the evening starts at 3 and ends at 6, supposedly. So that's the idea. All true sacrifices suggest the idea of blood and death. Blood is what God used to make atonement for sin. Leviticus chapter 16, Leviticus chapter 17 especially. And again, Jesus' precious blood, because he was perfect, was able to make us right and cleanse us. So think about here at this time, whenever the Passover was instituted, blood on the lintel and on the doorpost. The only thing different between the Jews and between the Egyptians was the fact of the blood covering as it was, splattering on the door. Think about how the blood covers sin. And so we see that same idea. We see that the lamb was prepared as they were roasting the whole thing all together. And again, think about how Jesus sacrificed himself entirely, body and soul. There was not a bone of him, broken. So again, think about that, how the similarity between this comes into play there. And again, we remember that that's part of it. The unleavened bread represented what? Leaven often suggests the idea of the leaven of sin. Well, unleavened bread suggests the idea, number one, that they had to get up and get ready to go. But it also has the idea of, again, making sure that we don't have sin in our lives. Think about in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, Jesus is our Passover. He emphasizes there shouldn't be any wickedness or hypocrisy in our lives. The bitter herbs, we talked about before, suggested the idea of the sufferings of Jesus, the suffering of the Israelites. Think again how Jesus had to suffer. And so as you go through this, there's just so many similarities between this. So many similarities between this and what happened with Jesus dying upon the cross. And it's so important, again, to really look at that. It was their redemption. We are redeemed as well. There's so many parallels between what we're reading here and what we find out later as we become members of the church and servants of the Lord. So, go a little further down through here. We talked about the idea that this was going to be a thing that was going to be instituted, and they were to keep it throughout their generations. It was supposed to be done every year. Now, if you would turn to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23 is part of that passage. And again, we struggle reading through Leviticus, but here is where all of the different feasts are to be done. In Leviticus chapter 23, verse 3, he says every Sabbath day there had to be what? Every Sabbath day there had to be no work done on the Sabbath. It's a day of holy convocation. Then you have the feast of the Lord, the holy convocation, on the 14th day of the first month at twilight, the evening, is the Lord's Passover. Notice it calls it the Lord's Passover. It's not just something that they did, but it's the Lord's Passover. And then on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to the Lord. And notice on the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any customary work on it. And after the seventh day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. So he's talking about all the times when the Jews, every Saturday, every Sabbath day, they would be off. They would be off at the beginning and the end of all of these different feasts. And so he says, you get into the land, verse 9, and there's the Feast of First Fruits, okay? And so there's that very first one. And again, he emphasizes the idea this shall be a statute throughout all your generations. The Feast of Weeks begins in verse 15. Now, the Feast of Weeks is also known as what? Anybody? No? Pentecost. Pentecost, okay? That's why he said you shall count from yourselves from the Sabbath day after the Sabbath, the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths. 7 Sabbaths is what? 49 days. And then come 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath, then you shall offer a new grain offering to the Lord. Now, what's the symbolism there? Again, that's when the Lord began or started the church, right? So think about that. There was the Feast of the Trumpets in verse 23 of chapter 23. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial of, blowing the trumpets. Then he said on the 10th day of the 7th month, you have the Day of Atonement. To get the Day of Atonement, you go back to Leviticus chapter 16. And again, that was the day where they were to fast that day. It was a day for them to think about their sins. And it was a day for their sins to be atoned for by the shedding of blood. And then in Leviticus chapter 23, there was then the Feast of the Tabernacles, the 15th day of the 7th month. So, as I shared with you last week, this was the beginning of their calendar in a religious sense. They also had, interestingly enough, another calendar that they ran their government by at that same time. So that's why sometimes as we go in there and look at some of these things, that's why sometimes we get kind of confused. Some of this stuff, especially in the Old Testament, confuses us anyway because, number one, we don't study it, but number two, we weren't there. So the whole idea of a sacrificial system is foreign to us. The whole idea of killing animals for our sins is foreign to us. What you have to do on certain days and how you had to do it, that's foreign to us because we are living under the reign of Christ. So it's hard for us to understand, but I think it's, again, something that guides us and helps us to even know that much more how much we ought to be grateful for what's going on. All right? Now, we go on a little bit further here, and as I said, we could spend a couple, 3 weeks on this, but he says, then what happens, it happened at that midnight, verse 29 of Exodus chapter 12. It came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. So, think about that. You think about the idea that in the land of Egypt, every firstborn child was struck dead. Now, what's interesting about this, if you remember, I gave you two different dates, possible dates for the Exodus. Remember that? I talked about 1239 and then 1440. And again, the reason is because of some commentators, not just commentators, but the archaeological evidence. Some people think it was quite earlier and some people don't. And you remember, what did I say was what I believe was the first, or the date of the Exodus? It would have been the what? The 1440 date. If that's the case, and again, I stress that, if that's the case, if Amenhotep II was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, his son who died was the older brother of Thutmose, who succeeded Amenhotep. So in essence, you find that Thutmose IV was not the oldest son, the usual heir of the throne, but he had to obtain the position by some other means. So it seems like even Pharaoh's own son died. Firstborn son died. So another son had to take his place whenever Amenhotep II died. So it's interesting that they did mention that in that respect as well. Even in their archaeological evidence, that's what's happening. Now, notice Pharaoh rose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt. There was not a house where there was not one dead. Now, again, I think as we look at all of this together, we're tying all this together, and we understand that may very well be where God is bringing about the retribution because of the demand that they kill all of their sons. So all of this just comes back together. Whether we wish to or not, one of the things that I find, and I'm sure you do as well when you're studying Scripture, is while men may try to hide sin, God knows about it, and it will come back to get you. You will have to pay for it one way or another. So that's one of the things he emphasizes. And so verse 31 emphasizes the idea to us, Exodus 12, that Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Go out from among my people, you, the children of Israel, go serve the Lord, take your flocks, take your herds, and be gone, and get out of here." Now, all up to this point in time, he's been arguing and reneging on promises, right? But now he said, "I'm done. I'm finished." And the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We shall all be dead." So the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up in their shoulders, and they had done according to the word of Moses. They had asked for the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. Now, what does plunder suggest? Huh? Kind of, yeah, okay, and yeah, you're right. As you're thinking about it, you think of the idea of pirates. But in war, specifically in war, a lot of times, and especially during this time, whenever one army would beat the other army, then they would plunder. They would take everything that the other army left, okay? That would be, and so think about this in this respect. As God used this term plundered, it suggested the idea that the children of Israel beat the armies, as it was, of Egypt, took everything they had, but also there's another thing, two other things going on here. Number one, it may very well be, think about it this way, that was their pay for years of slavery. That was their pay. So they're leaving Egypt with Egyptian gold and silver and everything else. And what's also interesting about this is a lot of this is going to show up again later on in the last part of the book, in the building of the tabernacle. Unfortunately, it's also going to show up at the golden calf situation, right? So some of this very same stuff is going to be used for that purpose. All right, we go on a little further. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot besides children. 600,000, and we've often talked about the ideal if every one of them had a wife and one child, you're looking at 1.5 million people traveling. Okay, now try to picture that in your mind as much as you possibly can. If we could even begin to imagine, let us suppose for a moment, the last time I heard, I think that Atlanta was right at 4 million people. Atlanta and all its suburbs. Try to picture everybody in the city of Atlanta packing up all of a sudden, and they're all going to move to Alabama all at the same time. I know some people are rolling their eyes, but I'm just using this. If you want to move to Tennessee, I don't care. Or if y'all want to go down to Florida, I don't care. But you just picture 4 million people packing up, everything, just going to leave the city of Atlanta, and they're going to start, and they don't get on the quickest plane or nothing. They start walking. It's going to be a mess. You could just imagine if you would. Now, let's talk about this for a moment. The trip from Egypt, where they were living in the land of Goshen, down to Mount Sinai is about approximately 250 miles. Again, they didn't jump on an airliner. They didn't get on a Greyhound bus. They didn't get in their cars. They walked 250 miles. So if you look at it from that viewpoint, if we were moving to Alabama, you would be moving not to close, just across the border, but you would be close to the Mississippi-Alabama border, okay? Or if you're going to Florida, you would be at the Georgia-Florida border, or maybe on down in Florida just a little piece. Can you imagine 4 million people? Now, at the same time as they're all traveling in the same spot, think about that this is a deserted land. So it's not like you're going to be able to stop. And first of all, there's not a restaurant in the world that would be able to feed 4 million people just for one meal. I want you to try to picture that for a moment. Think about crying babies. Not only that, but think about all the animals that they're driving along. Cows, sheep, goats, all of the stuff that they had. Because remember what he said, get you and all your flocks and your herds and everything else be gone. So you can't drive. Now, let me also emphasize this. You cannot drive sheep and goats and some of these other animals. You can't drive them like you can cattle. You know, we watch the old Westerns where they're driving these cattle on a 1,000-mile journey from down in Texas up to Kansas or someplace like that. You can't drive them very fast. So at any time along this line, not only that, but if you're going on areas that you're not familiar with, you could have been attacked by anybody. I'm just trying to draw out the picture to you that a lot of times we read this, but we don't think about the logistics of what's going on here. We don't think about the food that would have been taken care of, how you take care of the animals on the trip. Most of us would assume, well, if they're going to take cattle on the trip, they kill the cattle, but there's not going to be enough cattle to feed 4 million plus people. If there is, it's only going to be what? Maybe a week at the most, right? Then you start into the sheep, and then you start into the goats. So you see, what I'm trying to emphasize to you, this is something that is just, we read this and we're just kind of like, wow, they just went down to Mount Sinai. But I want you to begin to understand what is going to be involved in all of this and how God every day was going to take care of them. Every day on that trip. And for the entire year, they're going to spend an entire year at Mount Sinai. So I'm trying to get that in our minds helps us to understand how great this thing really is, how great this Exodus was. Notice verse 41. He says, verse 40, the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. That was from the time that Joseph brought them down, that we read about in the last part of the book of Genesis, until the time that they left. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies, notice the word armies now you're going to start seeing this phrase armies and hosts, because now, as God is looking at it, the children of Israel are his armies. What was he going to do? He's going to send the children of Israel to punish the Amorites. Genesis 15, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it's going to be the armies that's going to be bringing them down there. So this was a night of solemn observance to the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord. Notice it is a night of the Lord. This is that night of the Lord, a solemn observation for all the children of Israel throughout their generations. Now, as we go through the rest of the Bible, in the Old Testament, we only read of about 6 times in Scripture where the Passover was kept. I would like to think that they kept it more often, but we only read of actually 6 times. We read of one time whenever they finally leave or get close to leaving Mount Sinai. During the time of Hezekiah, there was a Passover. During the time of Josiah, there was a Passover. During the time of Solomon, there was a Passover. But I want to emphasize to you, this was going to be something that they were supposed to do every year. Remember that from Leviticus chapter 23. So again, keep that in mind. And again, he gives them some more Passover regulations in verse 43. Number 1, this is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat it. And I emphasized the idea last week, and again, I want to emphasize this again, that the law was for everybody all the way across the board. If a sojourner, a traveler, was traveling through there, then the only way he could partake of the Passover is if he would become a Jew. He would have to be circumcised to be able to partake of the Passover. Every man's servant who's brought with money, when you have circumcised him, he may eat it. In one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break one of its bones. And again, this is very interesting as you emphasize there that not a bone of that Passover sacrifice was to be broken. Jesus, not a bone of him was broken. John 19 at verse 34. The congregation, all the congregation of Israel shall keep it. Then he said, if a stranger dwells in the land, let all his males be circumcised. One law shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells among you. And so it came to pass on that very same day, the Lord brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to what? Their armies. There again is that phrase, their armies. So this is how God is looking at them, and he's going to have to get them into a situation where they're going to be ready to fight. So that's part of the reason why he does not take them. Now, if you're looking at a map, Egypt, this is the Mediterranean Sea, okay? I'm not very good at map drawing or anything like this, but this is the Nile Delta. This would be the land of Goshen. The Nile is down this way, and the children of Israel lived here. There was a path from here going up. Now, the land of Canaan was kind of like this, like the land of Israel today, okay? There was an actual highway, it's called the Highway of the Philistines, that went from here to here. You could go back and forth. In fact, a lot of times during the time of the right there during that particular time frame, and at other times we're also going to read in 2 Kings, we find that Egypt, and you remember what's over here. This is the Tigris and Euphrates River, and this goes into the Gulf of Suez. All right. So one of the things I want to keep in mind is all this out here is what? Desert, right? So God does not send them up straight through here. He's going to send them down here into Saudi Arabia, in part of Saudi Arabia. All righty? So this is desert he's going to take them into. He's going to take, he knows that they're not ready to fight, just going straight out of here. He's got to spend some time preparing them. This whole idea of the 10 plagues should have built their faith. But we're going to see as we start going through here that their faith is one of the biggest struggles that they have. And that's one of the biggest struggles that we have. So, one of the first things he does, chapter 13, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. In other words, you set them apart. You set them apart. Now, what's going to happen with that firstborn? How's God going to take the firstborn and make them his, specifically? No comments, no thoughts? All right. What he does is especially, and we're going to read this in the book of Numbers, but what he does is he numbers all the children of Israel. And then he also numbers how many of the firstborn there are. So when they're going through and counting all the children of Israel, then they also have to count how many firstborn children there are. All right? So then what he does is then one of the parts of the children of Israel that was not numbered was the Levites. So what God actually does in taking the children of the firstborn is he takes the entire tribe of Levi and says, that tribe is mine in a special way. Now, what do we remember about the tribe of Levi? They're the priests. They're the priests. So that's how the tribe of Levi gains or becomes God's very special tribe, because they're the chief priestly tribe. And as we continue to go through this in Exodus, and especially in Leviticus and Numbers, we're going to see that parts of the tribe, they had 3 different clans, and there were parts of the tribe that served as priests. There were parts of the tribe that moved the tabernacle. There were parts of that particular tribe that served as sentry duty and other things as you go through the book of Leviticus. So this is where they get the tribe of Levi, and the tribe of Levi becomes specifically the Lord's in lieu of the firstborn. Why did God want the firstborn? To commemorate to the children of Israel constantly what? That they had been saved. And again, it was something to constantly remind them of this. We're going down in verse 11 to see this in just a moment. In verse 3 through 10, you see the idea of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. So again, the day of the Passover feast was that first day, and then for 7 days after that, they had what? The Feast of Unleavened Bread. And as I mentioned to you before, as we talk about these feasts, this is where it sometimes gets a little bit confusing. But the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, even though they're actually 2 separate commemorations, but a lot of times as you're reading, especially in the New Testament, when he talks about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, just kind of put in your mind that's also right there at the Passover. Okay? So all that's coming in there together. All right. He says, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. So who brought them out? It was the Lord. It wasn't that they called in an airstrike or anything like that. It was the Lord. All righty? I know, I'm sure you heard the story one time of a little boy who went to church, and he heard in this Bible class the story of the Exodus. And his mama and daddy went home, and they said, what did you learn in Bible class today? He said, well, I found out today, he said, I found out about how God brought about the saving of the children of Israel in the Exodus. His daddy said, well, what happened? Well, Moses was the general. And so what he did is he built a bridge across the Red Sea. And then after he built the bridge across the Red Sea, the Egyptians tried to follow him. He called in an airstrike and destroyed that bridge across the Red Sea. And Daddy's kind of looking at him like, huh? What in the world are you talking about? Where did you get this? He said, well, if I tell you the way they told it, you would never believe it. So, you think about what happens in that respect. God is saying, I brought you out. And that's very important. Think about with our redemption, with our exodus from sin and our redemption in Christ, it's God who gets us there. Think about that. Just like it was with the children of Israel, we are saved because of what God did. We could never be good enough on our own. We could never live a perfect life. I've actually heard people talk about the idea of, or try to come up with case scenarios where, well, what if somebody actually lived an actual perfect life? I said, there's never been one that does it. If we believe the Bible, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Nobody could have done it. So the only way we could be saved, the only way the children of Israel were saved was what? By God's power. And that's something to always, always, always keep in mind. I hear some brethren sometimes say, well, if you do enough good works, you'll be saved. No, that's not gospel, because you will never do enough good works to pay for the sins in your life. So it's interesting, he's emphasizing here, and again, when it talks about our own redemption and exodus from sin as it was, God did that too. So he says, on this day you're going out in the month of Abib, and it shall be, you remember this was the beginning of their month. It shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. No leaven shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in all your quarters. Again, if you go back and you read Josephus and some of these others, Jewish literature, they would talk about the fact that the priest would go into the house and he would certify the house totally leaven-free. And I'm talking about, we often talk about the idea of spring cleaning. They clean the house to where not one piece of leaven would be found in that house whatsoever. And literally, the priest would have to go in and check that out and give a certification that they had no leaven in their house for that particular time. And again, it goes back to what he's saying right here. You shall tear your son in that day. Now, here's something else that was going to be done. Remember, one of the things that I brought out in that Exodus video was the fact that children were to ask, why do we celebrate this? Why do we have the unleavened bread? And what this was a way for them to remember their history. I've often made the point that we need to teach our children our history in the church and in America. We need to teach our history and how we got to where we are. So he says, it shall be as a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. And for with a strong hand, the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. So again, notice he says, the Lord did it, the Lord did it, the Lord did it, the Lord did it, the Lord did it. And even here, we see the pattern that what we're going to see in the New Testament, that it's the Lord that saves us. So he then says, verse 11, it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you, that you shall set apart to the Lord all that open the womb. Every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have, the males shall be the Lord. Every firstborn of a donkey, you shall redeem it with a lamb. If you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And so the time will come when your son says, what is this? By strength of hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. Therefore I sacrificed to the Lord all males that opened the womb, but the firstborn of my sons I redeemed. And again, the idea of redeem is buying back. Okay? So he would buy them back. And again, specifically, he's going to use the tribe of Levi. And whenever they actually do the count between all the firstborn of the children of Israel and all the boys, all the males of the Levite tribe, they will find that there's a discrepancy of 210. And so the children of Israel had to pay that much more money to redeem those extra firstborn, and that was to go into the coffers, as it was, of the priest at that time. So he said, this shall be a sign on your hands and as frontlet between your eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. Now this idea of the sign on your hand and frontlet between your eyes, later in the New Testament we're going to read about the Pharisees making broad their phylacteries. You remember that? Well, the phylactery would be a piece of leather that would be posted on the head, and in this little leather pouch they would have the Shema in it. Now what is the Shema? Deuteronomy chapter 6, where he emphasizes, well, let's look at it very quickly, where he emphasizes what that is. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, this Shema, this was as it was their confession of faith. All right? Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. So they would actually make a little leather thing to go in a little leather pouch, and they would have the Shema written on this on their forehead. Or if they did not have it here, they would have it on their wrist. And again, it goes back to this very same thing that he's talking about here. It shall be a sign on your hand and frontlets between your eyes. For by strength of hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt. Okay, now, it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the children of Israel go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines. In other words, he didn't lead them straight up through here. And here's the reason why. lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around the sea by the way of the Red Sea. Now, again, if you're looking at a map, and again, I'm not a very good map drawer, all righty? But I'm going to try to draw this out again a little bit different, all right? We're going to leave all this Tigris and Euphrates River out. We're going to leave Israel out for right now. Now, what happened is you had in Egypt, here's the land of Goshen, and it went down into the Nile River, and then right around here, not very far, there was what is known as the Red Sea. And then this thing went on down a little bit further on down. And here is, as it was, this Gulf. And down in here is Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is way down here in the very bottom of the desert, okay? So the Red Sea. So he did not send them up to Palestine, but he sends them back down this way. Now, there's going to be a big discussion in a lot of commentators about whether or not this was the Red Sea or the Reed Sea. Now, the emphasis is that, again, the critics who deny that the Bible is the actual Word of God, they say it has to be the Reed Sea, and there was a little bitty swampy grassland place that was called the, quote, Reed Sea. And all it was just a big swamp, all right? But they're saying that there's no way that God would have allowed all these people to travel through the midst of the Red Sea because it is a huge body of water. So they try to come up with this explanation that they just got it wrong. It's not the Red Sea, it's actually the Reed Sea, and they just passed through some marshy swamplands. Okay? Now, when you're trying to deny what the Bible says, you will pick at straws at everything in the world. And this is what they try to do. Think about it, and I said this before, I want to remind you again, at the very beginning of time, what did the devil do to tempt Adam and Eve? He just added one word to the Bible. He just added one word to God's word. You shall not die. You shall not die. Even though God said, in the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely, what? Die. And all he said is, you shall not die. One word. A little three-letter word. And history was changed because of that moment. The devil is doing his best to attack God's word every way he possibly can. And they are out there. So as you're reading the commentators, you will read some of this idea that some people think it's a Reed Sea, a marshy swampland. But what they're now beginning to find, and there was some things on, and I question the validity of it. I'm very hesitant whenever I read of a new discovery or something like that. I get very hesitant. But recently, as I'm talking about in the last 6 months to a year, they've talked about on some sites that they have found remnants of the Egyptian army in part of the Red Sea. Now, again, it's amazing to me that they haven't found it up to this point in time. There's just, in other words, I'm going to be very skeptical about that until there's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. All right? But there was one part of the Red Sea here, as it was, that they think it's about, they're thinking about it's about 2 to 3 miles down in this area here. So it's still at the very top of the Red Sea. And it's roughly, they think, about 2 to 3 miles down there, down from the tip of the Red Sea here, where they actually did the crossing. All right, so I'm trying to get that in and get you in your mind. So God didn't send them up this way. He sent them down this way, and then he was going to send them, again, I'm not the best map drawer. You can look at some other maps, and they'll do a lot better job. But he's going to send them this way, and then this is going to be on down into, this is a mountain range down here, and this will wind up down there. So he's actually going to cross, and they're going to come across and skirt this mountain. And by the way, that is right there. That right there is the Gulf of Suez, okay? All right? So try to picture that as much as you can when you're looking at the map. This is water. All right, so there's a mountain range that they're going to be skirting this mountain range all the way down to Mount Sinai. All right. Have y'all got a map or anything? Do you see it? Good. Okay, so you see what's going to be happening here. All right. So he says, he took the orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt, Exodus 13, verse 19. He took the bones of Joseph with him. Now, why? God or Joseph told him, said, you make a promise, you take my bones back. Now, we don't really know. We know that the children of Israel were in bondage 430 years, or were in the land of Egypt for 430 years. But there were some times whenever they were doing well, they were multiplying, but then they finally were made into slaves. So just picture that in your mind. Joseph made a promise, and we're talking about 400 years later. They get his bones, and they take them with him. What's also interesting about this is we read about this, but it isn't until the time of Joshua. After 40 years wandering in the wilderness and the time of Joshua, that Joseph finally gets his bones buried in his last final resting place. So can you imagine being, Joseph said, I want you to take me back home when y'all go back. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And so it's been ever how long it was after Joseph died. And then he's carried around while they're fighting these battles and all this other stuff. And it wasn't until the time of Joshua that those bones get buried. But they keep the promise. For that to happen that way, you've got to have a very cohesive family that's going to do what you tell them to do, and not just one or two generations, but maybe 3 or 4 generations down the line, making sure that great grandpa's bones get buried where he wants them to be buried. Wow. So they took their journey from Succoth, camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So this is how he's leading them. So these last few verses here in chapter 13 are very important as they're going out. The Lord said, and he spoke to Moses, said, speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon, and you shall camp before it by the sea. Now, again, if you're looking at a map, it would have been easy for them to leave the land of Goshen here and just to go across and cross before they got to the Red Sea. But God said, no, I don't want you to do that. You're going to bring them down here. So he brings them down. And by the way, on this side of this area too, there's mountains. All right. So if you're looking at this very closely, they're hemmed in. You don't take an army and take it into a place where you get hemmed in by water or by mountains. You don't do that. That's just not good strategic tactical planning when you've got a war going on. Okay, you don't do that. But that's exactly what, and it's always interesting to me as you read a lot of these battles that God asks the children of Israel to fight. He always gets them in the worst, or they're always in the worst possible situation. And they come out. Because God is trying to emphasize to them, it's not you and how strong you are that's going to save you. It's me who's going to save you. He's always trying to emphasize that. And there's something that he keeps trying to emphasize over and over again, that again, sometimes we need to get in our minds. We can't be saving ourselves. We're not going to succeed. We've got to have God's help. Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, so he will pursue them. And I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. Now, the children of Israel were walking out of the land of Goshen, high step, smiles on their faces. Their slavery was over. God had delivered them. Everything was going great. There should be no problems now from here on out, right? Right? Well, there's a problem. And again, they get so happy about this situation that they fail to realize just how perilous things really are. So, he's telling Moses, he said, look, this is going to happen, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over his army, so that you may know that I'm the Lord. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled. And the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people and said, why have we done this? That we let Israel go from serving it. We had all this free labor. Now we've been decimated. And who's going to build our walls? And who's going to build our cities? And who's going to make our bricks? And who's going to do our crops? And who's going to, they just lost a huge, huge workforce. So he made his chariots ready and he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh. And he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. So they're, like I said, that's what I'm saying. They're stepping high. They're happy. They're rejoicing. So the Egyptians pursued them, all his horses and the chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea of Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon. So the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and the Egyptians marched after them. Picture, if you could, a dust cloud, sand, all right? Now you're sitting there thinking this can't happen, but think about it. If they're in desert area and then these chariots are flying, there's going to be a dust cloud, all right? And then they're actually going to see what? They're going to see the glint of the chariots, the glint of the horses, and they're down here, and they can't go back up in the mountains because they'll be slaughtered up there. They can't go back up here because that's going right back into the enemy's teeth. What are you going to do? How are you going to get us out? You got us here. Now what? And I love this part of the story. And they said, the children of Israel were very afraid, and they cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word which we told you in Egypt? Let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to die or serve the Egyptians that we should die in the wilderness. I want you to remember this, because this is going to become their mantra through the whole wilderness wandering. Didn't we tell you to leave us alone? Why did you bring us out here to die? Moses, we want to kill you. And Moses, you think about Moses. Moses is literally, he's a prophet, but he's also the go-between between God and the children of Israel. Stop for a moment and think about the children of Israel had the opportunity to see the 10 plagues just like the Egyptians did. Their faith should have been what? Well, it obviously was very strong when they're walking out of Egypt, right? Look what God did for us. And now they're here. Now look what you've got us into. You see? And I think as you look at this, this is very important. I think Moses' faith has grown too. From saying back in Exodus 3 and 4, I'm not the man for the job, to now saying what? God, whatever you want, we'll do it. His faith has grown. And here's what happens. Whenever you go through trials and tribulations, when you go through plagues, your faith will either be shaken or your faith will be strengthened. A lot of times it's your choice. It's your choice, how you look at it, right? It really boils down to how you look at it. So this is something to really think about. So now I want you to key in on this very closely in verse 13. I love teaching this. And this is such a powerful passage. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Now, what's interesting, in the first part, God had told Moses that he was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So Moses knew what? That it was going to happen. And I don't believe that there were conversations between God and Moses, but that we don't have recorded here. But I love the way he handled this. He says, we don't read of anything other than what we've just read, but think about this. They're being trapped. They are now literally trapped. And Moses says, do not be afraid. Stand still. And it's and this is the way I've always pictured it. And if you think this is funny, that's okay, but this is the way I've always pictured it. Moses, with his faith, is standing up there to the children of Israel, says, God's going to take care of this. And then it's like, okay, God, how are you going to do it? To me, that's what I get out of the context. I'm sorry, but that's the way I get this. Why? Because the Lord then says to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. But lift up your rod, that same rod that was turned into a snake, that Moses had used in the last 3 plagues. That same rod, some people would think that was what? A magical rod. He said, you lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. I think sometimes, especially leaders in the church, when we don't know what to do, we need to tell the church, stand still, see the salvation of God, and kind of look back over our shoulder and say, okay, God, what you going to do? So often, we try to solve our own problems, make bigger messes out of them. We make big messes out of the church, don't we? Because we do things the wrong way. And sometimes we don't even know always what's the best way to handle some things. Faith in God. Faith in who God is. So, I will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them, and I shall gain honor over the Egyptians, over Pharaoh. And then the Egyptians shall know I am the Lord. When I have gained honor for myself, the children of Israel could never say that they fought them, Egyptians, and won. They could never sit back and talk about how they saved themselves. We can never say how we've saved ourselves, right? We can only be thankful for the fact that God saves us. And the children shall go on through on dry ground. And the angel of God, notice the word angel of God. I think I may have said this before, but I think this angel of God is the capital angel, could very well be. I think I may have mentioned this, the pre-incarnate Jesus, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. It was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other. So they came. Now, remember that 4 million that I was throwing around, that idea? Now you've got to get anywhere from 2 to 4 million people across this part of the dry sea, or the Red Sea. And it's got to be dry ground. And picture, if you would, and if you've ever seen the Moses or the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, you see that it just became a wall. Maybe that was one way to look at it, okay? But think about, again, it would have been a very deep part. I think they said, some of the people that said they found parts of that in that particular area, you're talking about the sea being anywhere from 10 to 12 foot deep right there. Now, can you imagine a wall of water on both sides just from that happening? The water had to be, and again, getting that many people, it wasn't single file. You couldn't get this, it wasn't going to be a single file deal. To get that many people across that quick, it had to be huge. It had to be a huge gap. So think about this. And that made the strong east wind all that night and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went in the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on the left. And the Egyptians pursued. That was not very smart of them. They had just been through the 10 plagues, right? And you think you're now going to walk through this whole thing, and you think God isn't going to do something about it? And that was foolish on their part. In the morning watch, so it had been probably about 9 o'clock, the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians. He took off their chariot wheels and drove them with difficulty. Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them. And now once everybody is across, Moses again stretched out his hands over the sea, and the sea returned to its full depth while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So he overthrew the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel have walked on dry land in the midst of the sea. And the Lord saved Israel. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt, so the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. We will stop there. Unfortunately, I would like to go further, but we have to stop there because folks got to go to another class. Next week, we're going to study the Song of Moses. This is the first song we read about in the Bible. And this is a very interesting song that as we look at it, we're going to see and compare that ideal of how it's going on. And then we're going to get, hopefully next week, we're going to get them down to Mount Sinai in chapter 19. All right. Then the week after that, the way I've got it planned is we're going to talk a lot about the covenant. And what I want to try to do is hit the highlights of the covenant and then start talking about the building of the tabernacle. All right. So thank you, brothers and sisters. I appreciate you so much. Hope, if we go back over this, that you're learning, and I hope this is challenging you and you're getting stronger in your faith as well. Okay. Appreciate all of you so very, very much. Thank you. Y'all take care.